All right, welcome, Jeff Brown. You are up at Bowling Green State, where you teach pop culture, comics, and a variety of other things. Welcome to Professor Latinx, and today we're going to talk about race, gender, and comics.
Sounds great. Thanks, Frederick.
All right, so the big question is, here you are in 2000, you published this book, Black Superheroes, Milestone Comics and Their Fans. By the way, that was a huge book for me. I mean, huge in the sense that I read it right after it came out, and I could not believe that we could publish scholarly books on comics.
Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe you can tell us, just starting with that, like what a huge monumental achievement that was.
Yeah, it was a weird one. Thank you. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from that book being early on, just as comic studies were starting to hit mainstream academia. And it was based on my dissertation, which I wrote at the University of Toronto. In my PhD is in anthropology. So it took a kind of weird route, and people, when I said I wanted to study fans and comic book fans and masculinity, at first they were like, nah, no one's going to be interested in that. It doesn't matter, and so on. And then when I said, well, I've got this angle on African-American masculinity as it's presented and understood by fans and so on. And then they were like, okay, maybe that's just enough of an angle to make it worthwhile. And then I really got into it. And I was lucky that Milestone Comics was just coming out and things were interesting in the industry. And the creators of Milestone were great. They were wonderful about, hey, come on down to New York. You can interview us, talk to people, and so on. So people were excited about it. And I tend to think that we like to tell ourselves people who are into comics and superheroes are smarter than the average bear kind of thing. And I think people were enthusiastic to take a look at these things. And then it just kind of caught that wave prior to superhero movies and things becoming really mainstream.
Yeah, well, it definitely opened the possibilities for many future generations of scholars like myself. So I know, me personally, I'm very thankful. You went on to write books on sort of pop culture generally. Can you share a little bit about your journey there, and also kind of why you've, at least in the comic space, kind of stuck to your guns with superheroes?
Sure. Yeah, that's easy. I mean, doing the other stuff, primarily I've done an awful lot on action movies and women in action roles, representations of women and gender in general, because it's another area that interests me, and it overlaps a lot with comics. And my two books on women in action movies each contain a couple of chapters about women in superhero stories. I think I'm interested in gender and these kind of lowbrow genres because they are popular, because they do affect us, because everybody knows them and watches them and loves them. And that's one of the reasons why superheroes. I mean, I love superheroes. I'm a fan. I'm a geek. It's how I learned how to read. I've been into them my whole life. But it's the fact that everyone knows them and everyone's shaped by them, even if they're not a superhero fan. I mean, I always tease my students. I'll have 300 students, and I say, who's Secretary of State? And 300 students, maybe 3 or 4 of them know who. That's it. And then I say, who's Batman's butler? And they all know it's Alfred Pennyworth. And at least half of them know that Batman's dog is named Ace and stuff. So there's no way you can argue that these people aren't being shaped by a Batman or Superman or something. They know them intimately. So I think that's one of the real reasons that I've focused on them. Plus, they're a really rich area to look at. They're so symbolic.
And so how do you answer someone who comes along and says, Jeff, so what? So you're getting your students to read and sort of analytically, I don't know, Chris Nolan's, Batman trilogy and unpack it, but who cares? Like, what kind of difference is that really going to make in the world?
Yeah, well, without too much profanity, my answer is usually um, because it matters more than other things. I mean, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, yeah, we look at that, the sheer success of that, over $1 billion per film, huge worldwide influence. Um, and so why? I mean, Batman in particular, people identify with it. Everybody does their "I'm Batman" voice kind of thing, and that can really suture you into the character and make you feel like you are part of it. You are identifying with Batman or Spider-Man or whoever. Um, and so it does shape your lives. And then the question is, how does that shape your idea of masculinity as being tough and strong, or why are all um, the large heroes, the most iconic heroes, why are they all white? What's the history of racism and sexism and homophobia and all these different issues in comics that have been taught to us? And over the years, people have become a lot more accepting of it, or understanding. I think since the movie genre has become huge, people seem to think it's worth more of an interest than silly kids books as far as they saw them.
Yeah, it is. It's incredible. We can take our students and those who are willing to listen to us for a couple of minutes to places of self-reflection, sort of social and political critique, all of those things, right, that have been typically left to or considered only, the space of like highbrow literary sort of study, right?
Right, right, exactly. And then with other colleagues, and I don't want to dismiss other people's areas of interest, but I was explain to my students that there's nothing wrong with being a fan. There's nothing wrong with enjoying these things. I mean, I have friends who are marine biologists. They're fish fans. They enjoy fish. They've been into it their whole life, and they, turned it into something. And but
That's true.
understanding Spider-Man that everybody is familiar with is more important culturally than perhaps marine biology. Nothing wrong with marine biology, but we're all fans of things. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about you've got several books already, and that are out and very important to us. You've got a forthcoming book. Yeah, tell us about that. Yeah,
I'm excited about it. It's coming out with Rutgers University Press, and it's a collection of essays about ethnicity in Marvel Comics, movies, and television shows in particular. Mainly, the main impetus was a few years ago when they did their all new, all different line, and they didn't actually replace. One of the chapters is about that they're not replacement heroes. But where suddenly Iron Man was an African American teenage girl from Chicago. Boy, who else? Suddenly an Asian Hulk, a Korean American Hulk, a lot of different African American Captain America. All these characters were sort of being put front and center, and it raised a lot of issues about how diverse could a world of superheroes be? What color could an Iron Man or a Captain America? What gender could a Thor be? And it raised a lot of different issues. So I've got chapters dealing with specific characters and trying to incorporate kind of a bit of a history. So the Asian superheroes chapter start with some of the historical conditions and stereotypes and characters like Shang-Chi or Agents of Atlas, and moving up to newer versions of them, but also Amadeus as the Korean American Hulk, and Silk, the Asian American Spider Woman type character, and so on. And I do that a bit of that in each chapter. So looking historically at Latina and Latino characters like White Tiger, and then how that's mutated into different generations of female white tigers, but then also Miss America and the importance of using America as a touchstone for that, as to what she represents. America being both her real name and her superhero identity.
is there something about coming of age or wish fulfillment. I mean, this is something that I'm constantly thinking about, that sort of materializes in and through comics. That's, well, special to comics, right? I mean, coming of age stories, we all love the kind of going back, especially, someone at my age going and reading a comic about coming of age as a teenager, and then especially coming of age as a Latinx, superhero, right? And the sort of wish fulfillment there. Is there something about comics that's kind of unique or special in those sort of spaces?
I think so. In like you at my age, I go back and not just reading the new ones that are the coming of age stories, but the ones I read as a kid. I love now that they're coming out with these collected editions of things, and reading ones that I know I read when I was 8 or 9 or whatever, and having that same sense of nostalgia and excitement, I think is interesting. But because they are such a clear metaphor for puberty and change and becoming an adult, I think that fantasy of, oh, I can fly, I can shoot webs out of my wrists, I can do whatever, is powerful, to everybody. And I think I always argue that there's people can identify across sort of these superficial social markers like gender and ethnicity and sexuality and so on. But there's a particular excitement when you do see yourself reflected, and which is why historically the lack of diversity in characters and superheroes has been hard. And it's weird writing about it, as a white heterosexual male, middle class male in North America. But my experience, even, as Canadian, is different. I'm not equaling Canadian with minority ethnicity, but when things like Alpha Flight came along or Wolverine,
Mm.
I know other kids my age were excited. There was some representation, some evidence of us in this fantasy world that you didn't have to identify across ethnicity lines and so on.
Yeah, no, it's really, really a exceptional space for that kind of cross, kind of, um, the lines in the sand that people, we know are constructs, but that become materialized as walls and boundaries that comics can allow us again the freedom to kind of cross back and forth. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, can I
yeah.
ask you, what was your favorite superhero as a kid?
Oh, that's a great question. So mine, like you, when we moved from Mexico, I was about 5 years old, and the corner store where we lived in the Central Valley, North Central Valley in California, had, the spin racks. And that's when comics were, relatively accessible even to a kid like me. And I would honestly like pick up anything, but the ones that were really memorable were like the Fantastic Four, and Thing was really important to me. And, of course, anything that I could get my hands on, Thor, Batman, all of those. But yeah, there was something kind of special about the team spirit of Fantastic Four, and
Mhm.
also the the um just the diversity, I guess, that was
Right.
presented there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think
I,
superhero comics always did a great job of that, especially Marvel. And then when they came out with the mutants and so on, of being an outsider, which, whether you were an outsider or not, every kid feels a little like an outsider and an outcast, and that real heroic idea of standing up for yourself and being misunderstood is powerful.
Yeah, and like you were saying, as a kid that didn't really, I didn't see myself in comics as a superhero because they just didn't exist. There was White Tiger, but I didn't have access to that kind of level of kind of niche at that, point.
Mhm.
Um, but it allowed me to think of myself beyond the confines of, our little space that we were living in, and kind of single parent mom working, and struggling, and all of us trying to like really like make it happen. And yeah, it wasn't a what really important place for me to go as a kid.
Mhm. Yeah, it's great escapism and still is. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've just gotten some sort of copy edits for this chapter in my Gender and Sexuality in Comics volume for Routledge. Um, yeah, marriage, domesticity, and superheroes for better or worse. What is that all about?
Um, and I'll have those edits back to you soon. But yeah, that chapter, as I've been looking at superhero at comics and movies and film or television and so on, um, there's so many tangential issues, and I think lately I've been interested in the ideas of romance and the lessons that it's teaching, uh, the social lessons about um, marriage and maturity, sexuality, norms of sexuality, but also, you know, incorporating an awful lot of same-sex relationships and cross-species relationships and all kinds of things. And we find it interesting because we tend to think superheroes only about punching people and truth, justice, and the American way. But when you look at the racks and so on, it's incredible how often the covers are, um, you know, Wolverine and Storm kissing, or Batman and Catwoman kissing, and it starts to look like Harlequin romances. So
Mhm.
as extreme gender ideals, you know, Superman and Wonder Women, I really have been curious lately about what lesson is being taught about relationships to readers and audiences and so on. Why is romance so important? And in this chapter, one of the things I tried to get at was the idea that in our society we think of, or at least in these stories, we're presenting these supermen as all powerful, masculine ideals, and there's this fear that becoming domestic, getting married, having kids, moving to the suburb, whatever, is castrating, that it steals your manly power and your strength, you're feminized, that to give in like that is seen as a negative. Although I think some, and that's definitely been the case historically, that sort of icky girls, stay away from them, Superman doesn't like Lois Lane, kind of thing. But lately there's been more of a, marriage isn't a trap that's going to rob you of your strength, and superheroes maybe can get married. Spider-Man, Superman, Batman most recently has gotten married. So what are the lessons? And it's like the ethnicity, I think, sort of breaking out what can be seen as heroic.
Yeah, that's great. So comics, yet again, as that kind of space of possibility and offering a kind of spectrum of different sort of masculinities in this case,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, I love it. I can't wait for this our volume to be out and ready. So why does the study and teaching of comics matter? We've kind of gotten a little bit to that, but yeah.
Um, I think it matters because it affects our lives, because it's a useful way to understand everything around us. I mean, as cultural studies is my focus, not literary studies, not genre studies, but I'm concerned with how we're shaped by the world around us and how we, as cultural beings, help shape it. And I think superheroes are so symbolic, that they can reveal a lot. I mean, the symbols are everywhere. They're written on their chests, they're worn on their helmets, they're in their names, the power types, and so on. So I think they're so ridiculously symbolic that it's easy to start breaking down things and seeing how these weird abstract cultural ideas about things like freedom, love, commerce, whatever, how those ideas are put into a story so that we teach them to young kids, so that they are getting a lesson about what our society thinks masculinity or femininity should look like, but also what justice should look like. Um, what are those American values? And it's an interesting way to consolidate them and see them in a you know, in a page or on a screen is very clearly. So I think that's why they matter. I think it can be done and is done with all kinds of other things. But particularly because we think of superheroes as being silly, fluffy, childish entertainment. They're just immature. There's no real meaning. that's where the meaning really lies. You know, when we assume that they're just innocent, don't look at them critically, and I think that's where we pick up more um, beliefs than we realize.
Have Can you share this is kind of just, maybe or maybe not, but could you share a moment when a student was like, wow, I had no idea that this sort of the analysis of the symbol of, I don't know, Superman, could lead me to this place.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think we did a class on superheroes I did, and in one of them we were talking about Batman and hegemony, and we started looking at there's a great piece from Pearson and Eurechio where they talk about Batman as an agent of hegemony. And we were talking in class about that, about why, why does Bruce Wayne have to be rich? And their answer is usually, well, so he can afford all those gadgets and stuff. It's like, yeah, but then who does he protect? What is he doing? And they started to realize, oh, he's stopping criminals. Wait, hold on, they're criminals who are stealing property. That this is about commerce and protecting certain statuses. Um, and the students really started to click about how this represented maintaining the status quo. That, why don't superheroes really go out and change things? Why don't they fight problems like racism or discrimination or poverty and so on? And they really had an aha moment, a couple of them, about that, as they framed it, oh, we're being programmed by these. And I tried to explain, well, it isn't so much programmed as it's just it's cycling through. But they really saw that hegemonic, how they accepted those as truths, even though they're completely artificially manufactured.
So thank you for that. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Can you share some of like your methods for teaching comics or comic book films, pop culture in general? How do you, I mean, of course, the primary text, the object is exciting in and of itself, but yeah, share with us maybe a little bit of your technique or your approach, your method, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if I have anything particularly groundbreaking that way. I wish I did. I wish I used it more creatively. I do have them read comic books. I have them watch movies. Sometimes we watch them together, and really try to expose them to these things. Comic books in particular are tricky because, as you probably know from classes, you get some students who have been lifelong readers and know how to read, and then others who look at the comic book page and they're like, oh my God, I don't know which direction to go in. I don't know what came first. How do I actually read this? Um, but pairing that up with academic or more scholarly readings, to get them to enjoy the primary text, and then read analysis of them, I think makes a difference. One of the most important things I always consider is trying not to take the enjoyment out of it. Um, I hate the idea that students would come out of a class in comic books and be like, oh my God, I'm never reading another comic book in my life. I didn't enjoy it. I want them to sit back, enjoy, get wrapped up in the story, and then try and unpack. And the same with movies. I tell them, don't write down who the second director was or who did special effects. I want you to just get lost in the story and then try to take yourself out of it afterwards. Um, Superhero movies being so big right now have been great because at least once a term, I'll take the students as a group. We'll do a trip to the movie theater and we'll watch whatever movie just came out. And they get a lot of, it's exciting because it's doing it on the fly. Then we'll meet in the next class and they're excited they went on a field trip and got to see Aquaman or whatever. But then to sit down and say, okay, this movie just came out, you just saw it. Are these same themes there? And when they're able to explore, wow, look at what Jason Momoa's body looked like in there. Look at why did his parents have to die? Why do these things have to happen? And really unpacking some of those things can be exciting.
Yeah, so how Scorsese sort of famously now said Marvel movies are not cinema. How did you respond to that with your students or just in general?
I actually had a whole bunch of reporters call and ask about that. And Scorsese is welcome to his opinion, but their cinema, their art, as much as anything else, they are genre pieces. They're not the genre that he does. You know, you can easily say, well, okay, there's a lot of superhero movies and there's not a lot of change in between those. But how many movies about mobsters in New York starring De Niro can he make? You know, he's making the same movie over and over again. And yes, superhero movies are going to go out of style. Every genre does, but they they are important and they're striking a chord right now. There's a reason why after 9/11 these have become so popular. Um, and Scorsese also, you know, that whole auteur style that the director is important and the artist, and he's going to be a champion of that because that's where he slots in. But superhero movies are doing something very different, and they're no less cinema. In fact, they're, and financially marketing, they're what are supporting the studios, so that other less profitable films can be made.
Um, it's interesting to me because, I mean, gosh, I mean, there is no more of an auteur, say, than Chris Nolan. Yeah, of course we have a Justice League, but then we have, you know, something extraordinary, you know, like right next to it. Right? There's all variety of the kind of superhero movies out there.
Yeah, and we rank them, right? Like we can say Chris Nolan's an auteur, so that can be nominated for Academy Awards, or Heath Ledger's a method actor, so he can win, or Joaquin Phoenix can win. But we're still stuck in that old mold, but audiences don't care. A lot of them don't care who directed it. They want a fun, interesting story that allows them some respite from all these awful things that are going on in the world.
So yeah, where is the vitality in comics today, superhero or otherwise?
Hmm. Good question. I think I think it's there. I think so many of them, so many titles are interesting nowadays, and I think uh, both at the big company at DC and Marvel, there's been more of a willingness to expand as the industry's changing. I mean, print books are struggling. You know, movies and marketing, they're bigger than ever and they're turning a profit, but comic book sales are down. The spin racks at the corner store are not there. Digital comics haven't taken off. They're trying to figure it out. And I think some of the things are bringing in more diverse characters, going for niche audiences, and having them updating the characters so they represent the world nowadays, um, leads to a lot of it. So yeah, the vitality, I'm not sure. One thing I hate is that comics do seem to keep going back and treading over the same storylines, um, and celebrating its past. It's a very insular type of medium. But I think there's been a lot of creators who are going in new territory and unpacking the genre. Somebody like Michael Bendis is doing a lot of stories where there's sort of a critique of superheroes and so on, really taking it into a different kind of rewriting or recreating the genre.
Gosh, thank you so much. This has been really enlightening for me, and it sort of reminds our audiences, our listeners, that yes, comics matter. Thank you, Jeff Brown, for spending some time with us.
No, no, thank you very much.